A difficult woman to forget, but in my opinion, well worth the effort. Her songs, on the other hand, are a little bit harder to forget. And indeed, that lyric is something which, despite every effort to try and forget it, it still comes creeping back. Well, we're going to start to look at that particular concept, Hit Me Baby One More Time, a little bit later. But first off, you've got to understand what's in it for you today. Because that side of it is more important to you than anything else. What are you going to get out of it? Well, I'm going to give you some tools and techniques to be able to sharpen your business presentations, but your business communications overall. You can ask the question, what is a presentation? Well, a presentation is any moment in which you present information to your clients or your prospects. It may be a website, it may be a traditional face-to-face presentation, it may be a brochure, it may be a pitch document, it may be a pitch itself. These are all presentational moments. So we're going to look at how you can exploit those more effectively. Who am I to be able to say this? Well, I came out of the theatre. Don't hold that against me, and there'll be no breathe here, darling, this afternoon. But it gave me some really good lessons. I moved out of the theatre quite quickly. I was working on the West End. Somebody came up to me and said, hey, do you fancy doing a little bit of business theatre? As if they were trying to trade me some illicit substance. And I said, well, I've never done it before. What's the difference between business theatre and traditional theatre? And they said about 50k a year. Well, I dropped my great artistic principles at that moment and walked straight out the door. I found myself doing events from Bondi Beach to Buckingham Palace and quite a lot of places in between. It was at a time when really the conference industry was about theatre. There was a lot of smoke and mirrors. To give you an example, I did an IBM event in Vienna in an opera house. Sounds glamorous, it wasn't. But we took with us an orchestra of 23, 120 35mm projectors, gives you an idea how long ago that was, 20 dancers, 6 Lipizzaner horses, you know, those are the ones that dance, and Miss World. Bonkers. That is the only way you can describe it. The content was as deep as an oil slick. So I started to look at that and realize that there was a real possibility here to be able to work on the content of communications in presentations and everything that businesses do. So that got me working with some quite interesting high rollers. I had Sir James Goldsmith, Jacob Rothschild, Robert Maxwell. But don't worry, not all my clients are dead. But it just says more about the timescale than anything else. But doing that work made me realize just how important it is to focus what you are presenting as a business. That led to my creating a business called Straight Talking. Straight Talking has been around for about 18 years. And its specialism is developing messages for businesses and coaching people to present those messages and also seeing how those messages can be implemented within the business. I started that business with a guy called Graham Davis, who's a lawyer. And you can take any attitude you like to that. I've certainly been barracking him for years over it. And together we started to create the tools and the concepts that I'm about to talk you through today. So they've all come from a pretty good heritage. It's the real world is where it's come from. The first thing I want to try and introduce you to as a concept is understanding the people you're talking to, or the people you want to talk to. And the only way to do that is by asking them questions, which people seem to be incredibly hesitant about doing. Somehow, there's a strange thing that when you go to present to people, oh, I know what they want to hear. I know what I need to present to them, so therefore, I'll just present. Why don't you start off by finding out exactly what that audience wants. Now, I'll give you an example. Just before Christmas, I put together a presentation for an international lawyer. Sounds glamorous? It probably is. He was going to Barbados to talk at a conference. You know, those sorts of conferences where you pack your golf clubs, your Speedos, and your laptop in that order. And he was going to have a good time, and he was going to employ me to write something credible for him to say. He gave me a brief, he gave me an information resource. It was about trust law. I don't know a lot about that. But I was able to dig into it and get an understanding that we could project in the presentation. But what I did do was I asked for the names and contact details of 6 people in the audience. I rang the conference organizer and said, I need this information. And I rang them up. Singapore, London, States. And I said, this guy is doing a presentation at the conference. What interests you about the subject of trust law? What do you think about that subject? What do you know about that subject? And what do you feel about that subject? Now, the feeling bit's really important, because don't put it out of the way in business. Because the way you feel directly affects the way you listen and the way in which you receive information. So you've got to understand. And I was getting feedback for that particular presentation, which was saying, well, I feel it's not that important, actually, to be frank. I'm fairly ambivalent. I'll just sit there and listen. So we knew we had to go out on an edge in that presentation to make an impact with an audience which just felt pretty much indifferent. They were there for the golf and whatever else they could do. But you have to find this out about the audiences. Especially, in my experience, internally in business. Senior management in businesses are rubbish at actually asking the people in their business what they think, what they know, what they feel about a particular subject. So that when they present, they're telling people stuff that goes across what they think, they tell them stuff they already know, and they're not taking into account the way they feel. So you need to ask questions directly. And unless you do that, you can't possibly know what you should be saying to people. I've done a bit of research around the people that are here today, some of which are here today, and that's given me an idea of what is thought to be important. And confidence is an important issue. And trust me, I think if someone was talking about that earlier, confidence can be huge when you know what that audience thinks, knows, and feels. Because you have the power to know I'm giving them what they want. So use that. The same applies to business development. I've got a few companies that I'm doing business development for at the moment. And I go out and I talk to their existing clients and ask them what they think and what they know, what they feel about the business. Because if we're going to develop it, we need to know what the good bits are about the business and what the bad bits are about the business. It's so often ignored. So if you're able to identify what the audience, and the audience may be somebody reading a page of a website, or reading a brochure, or presenting themselves in front of an audience, if you're able to take and understand that moment and the people that you're presenting to, you'll be able to establish where you're starting out from. And we'll call that the starting position for a communication. The starting position may be different for a surfer who's looking at your website, someone you're sitting in front of, someone you're pitching to. It's all slightly different. So understanding where they're starting out from, the starting position. You've then got to establish where you're going to take them to. Far too often, that particular point, what I call the finishing position at the end of that communication, is just too far away. There's something about presenting, something about the communication situation that Hey, I've got an opportunity to talk to people. I'm going to tell them everything. Do the audience want everything? The person who's reading it? The person who's listening to it? No, they don't. They want the relevant stuff and nothing else. So you need to be able to define a finishing position that is realistic for the audience that you've got in front of you. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because people don't do it. As well as being realistic, you need to have something which is timely. A destination that is not too long. These presentations are half an hour. I'll probably do half an hour, but if you've got a subject that only merits 10 minutes, only do 10 minutes. Sadly, the fact of life is that the brain will only receive what the bum will endure. So you have to be timely. Make sure that you're not putting too much on the website. Do you recognize that? The number of websites I look at that has got endless amounts of stuff on it. The person who's going there doesn't need all of that. They haven't got the time to read all of it. So you need that finishing position to be realistic for the audience, timely for that audience. And most of all, it needs to be measurable. And at that point, Britney Spears walks in the door, which is a bit of a concern, really. Britney Spears walks in because it's Hit Me Baby One More Time. Unfortunately, people don't ask for a particular action at the end of a presentation, or at the end of a web page, or at the end of a brochure. Something that you have to go and do. You need that Hit Me Baby One More Time moment, which is direct, saying what you want, what needs to be done. It's an action statement. Does that make sense? You have to do it. Even though we have loads of informational presentations nowadays. You know them, you've seen them, you've heard them. It's just a landslide of stuff with nothing at the end. These presentations could be my slides from my holiday at Corfu. They could be. I've seen them. So that has to have a measurable quality. Every presentation needs to be persuasive. If you're an after-dinner speaker, you're persuading people to laugh. If you're standing in front of the board and putting a proposition to them, you're wanting them to take action on it. If you're talking to a sales force and you're wanting to motivate them, you're wanting to actively get them to sell more. That's the presentations should have an action point, a hit me baby one more time element to them. And if they don't, you've got to ask yourself, why are you doing it? Don't do it just because it's comfortable. Just because it's, I'm going to talk about my business on a website. That's really very nice. Is it relevant to the people that you're actually pitching that website to? So, realistic, timely, measurable. That finishing position has to be achievable with the audience you've got in front of you. So what are you going to take your audience from the starting position to the finishing position? And I've got to endorse that this is about written stuff as well as presenting stuff. Well, you need a message. You need something to really grab them. And the message is a form of words that quickly and succinctly captures the essence of your business, your product, or your service. Why is this important? Because people don't have time to be able to filter everything out, to pan for gold in what you've got to say. You need to give it to them straight, so you need a message. The advertisers have got this. They use what I call macro messages. You know those Nike, just do it. Coca-Cola, the real thing. CNN, real news, real fast. That's what they do. But you know them. And what do? They capture the essence of the brand instantly. Do you recognize that? This is what people are doing to you all the time. There's a local companies do it as well. There's a company called Back consulting, you probably know Andrew Charlton. He's got an expression which is a macro message, which is back consulting. I deliver software on steroids. Nice line. Actually tells you what's going on. You can immediately understand what they do for a living. And the more complicated your business, the harder you've got to work to produce a message. Macro messages, the big messages used in advertising, I've seen some really great ones. There's a marvellous cafe in the East End of London called Churchill's. And they've got Churchill's outside, and it says, Churchill's, making lunch your finest hour. Great line. You've probably seen the buses that, midwifery, the career that delivers. Now, you can say these are advertising slogans, but in the world that you are now in, you need to understand your business well enough to be able to do this stuff. Because you can't go and buy an agency to do it, and you know your business better than anybody else, so you do it. I think the most alarming one I've ever come across is I saw it outside a gym, a health gym, and it was one of those flopping signs that was on the pavement. And it said, you may be fat and ugly, but you could just be ugly if you visit a home space gym. Phenomenal. But this is the sort of aggressive stuff you can do. And I went in, I saw this, and I went in and I said, is it working? And they said, is it working? Because they were challenging the fundamental things about human beings. You know, we all think we're not quite as good looking as we might be. It's just the truth. So, be imaginative about creating the macro messages that you produce for your business. Now, macro messages are great, and they have entertainment value. However, you need something a little more precise when you're presenting to prospective clients, brochures, websites. You need something more targeted. And this is a micro message that I would refer to. And this still, quickly and succinctly, captures the essence of your business or your service or your brand, but it does so for a particular audience at a particular time. All the other ones we've talked about are really carpet bombing, aren't they? Just going out there and carpet bombing the audience. You need to be much more specific when you go out and present to people, or on a dedicated web page about a particular sort of service that you're presenting. So, a micro message, what's that actually got to have in it? Well, I'll give you an example, that's the best one, and pardon me if you don't play golf, it doesn't really matter. This particular example, I think everybody can see because it relates to a product which everybody's seen on television or whatever, and that's golf clubs. And we'll take Callaway golf clubs. Those of you who don't play golf, they're quite grown up, pretty expensive, and people aspire to them. Do they still aspire to them? I think they possibly, no? Somebody making a bit of a face in the front row there. No, not anymore. They did. There you are, you see, totally behind the times. The micro message for Callaway golf clubs, when they're presenting to, let's say, golf pros who are on the course, they would like to be in the bar, they'd like to be playing golf, and they'd like to be standing outside the golf shop talking to the people who are visiting the club. They don't really want to be selling. So we'll say, Callaway golf clubs are the golf clubs for you because they're high profile in the press, make them easy to sell at the best possible revenue to you. So that's immediately covering all the bases. High profile in the press, easy to sell, loads of money. But if you were going to put that presentation, that micro message together for a golfer, it would be completely different. It would probably be something like Callaway golf clubs, the golf clubs for you, because they hit the ball the furthest distance for the least amount of money. But of course, if it was for me, it would have to be the furthest distance in the right direction. for the least amount of money. I think we've all been there. So creating a micro-message that is crafted for the people that you are directing your communication toward is really important. You can craft this by making sure that you understand the audience, by asking questions of the audience. If you're going to pitch to a company, why don't you ring up the MD of the company you're going to pitch to and get past the PA by saying, if I can ask 3 questions just now on the phone, I'll shorten our pitch by 15 minutes. Trust me, you can get past people like that. I have. And you ask the questions which allow you to be able to create this micro-message. Because you understand the way they think, what they know, and what they feel. Make sense? It's quite simple, and you can do it. Once you've got a micro-message, very simple, this is completely non-electronic, and pardon me, but it does work. Get an A4 sheet of paper. You remember what they look like? Because we don't see very many of them nowadays. And get that A4 sheet of paper and write your micro-message. Hits the ball the furthest distance in the right direction for the least amount of money, slap bang in the middle. Put a circle around it and put spokes coming out from that circle. And at the end of each spoke, put a fact, something interesting, an anecdote, a bit of data, anything that supports that micro-message. And that gives you a non-linear layout of that information. That's quite important, because don't write a list, because inevitably you have something at the top of the list and something at the bottom of the list, and you lose things in the middle of the list. But if they're all round this circle, they all have equal visual impact. Make sense? Do it. It's just an A4 sheet of paper, and it doesn't take long. And you started to build the content for the presentation. You then have to do the hardest thing in the universe. Well, it's a bit of an exaggeration, I will admit, but it is really hard. You've got to edit. You've got to edit the material. And it becomes, I've seen grown men weep. CEOs who have got favourite slides that they've incorporated around their brainstorm. And they go, and just, it's a really great slide. And you say, but why do you need it? And to try and fence this off, I can give you a very simple filter. And this is an informational filter to help you edit. It's called nice to know, should know, must know. Your audience isn't there for the nice to knows. They don't need the nice to knows. If you imagine any audience, whether they're reading your website or listening to you in a room, think of them with scarves saying, what do we want? Content. Where do we want it? Now. That's what you've got to think about when you're editing. So, nice to knows, they can go. Should knows, well, of course, should knows have got maybe in front of it. Maybe they should know. Well, that just means you haven't done your homework. You don't know what they think, what they know, what they feel. You haven't done your homework. So you can cut out the maybe they should knows. You know, you've got to be careful with that cough. I know somebody who died from a cough like that. Mind you, he was standing naked in a wardrobe at the time. So you do need to be able to, I'm going to drive myself now, that's always the worst moment, isn't it? So you need to be able to edit it down. And using the nice to know, should know, must know, you can remove everything except the must know. Edit, edit, edit when in doubt. It's the best thing you can possibly do. Especially when it comes to websites, especially when it comes to pitch documents. One of the jobs that I did quite early on in my life was to work with Volvo on their pitch documents. They couldn't understand why they weren't getting the business. This was for fleet deals. Couldn't understand why they weren't getting the business. They had a 49-page document which had everything in it And they knew it was comprehensive. Well, the answer to them not getting the work was because of that 49-page document. Because every presentation is cascaded to another person. They went to see the fleet manager went to the finance director went and talked to the MD. The 49-page document went boom, boom, boom across the desks. Nobody read it. So we produced what I call an executive summary. And that executive summary was 3 pages. 3 pages is long for an executive summary. And that told the story. And some of the grown men weeping were actually the people out of that business who were going, no, you can't take that environmental stuff out. It's honestly, it's so important. People really care about that. And the truth is, they didn't. They wanted a solution which was clearly defined with a micro message that was able to capture the essence of their proposition. So, editing it down wherever possible. These are the challenges you've got. Now, I'm going to cover one thing which is not in the book, and that is PowerPoint, just whilst we're here. It's a bugbear. I've got to say it right now. You'll notice that I haven't got any. I call it PowerPoint Prozac. Prozac because it's there to cheer up the presenter, not cheer up the audience. Too often PowerPoint turns into a reading competition in which the presenter comes last. Build your presentation using these basic tools of the research, creating a micro-message, brainstorming it, editing it, and then look to see which bits of PowerPoint you might need. That's all you need to do. And sometimes you don't need any. Have you done, I'm going to do a quick check here. Have you missed the PowerPoint this afternoon with me? Oh God, I wish we had some PowerPoint. I want pictures! Give me a picture. It's what people want, yes, maybe they do. A bit. And if I'm honest, I do quite often use pictures. And they do work really rather well. But in this instance, I thought I'd just go cold turkey and say, nope, we're not going to have any PowerPoint this time. So that's how I've ended up with Dan Bond, Hit Me Baby One More Time. You now know what that means. Electronics have got into everything. Software does everything nowadays. And I digress for a moment. My business partner, Graham Davis, we've been together 18 years. Sounds like something more, doesn't it? And Graham and I have been business partners for that long. And he did a bit of work with the London Business School, which I thought was a bit brave of him. And they were producing some software to try and analyze the sort of people types that you meet. You recognize that there's loads of software out there doing that sort of thing, and they were trying to develop a different one. And they developed one which included the color of the car that you drive. There's some amazing stuff out there now. And they managed to identify that if you drive a black car, you'd be focused, ambitious, and driven. I don't see anybody going, oh, yeah, sounds like me, you know, they're doing that. But the good news is that if you drive a red car, you have quite a high sex drive. Oh, you see this? That immediately gets people to identify with certain things. And so I said that to one group, and somebody just spontaneously blurted out, but my wife's got a red car. We won't go there. And if you drive a green or a yellow car, you'll be solid, a bit placid, and frankly a bit boring. Yeah, that might ring some bells with you. But if you're arrogant, sarcastic, and opinionated, you'll drive a white car with a blue flashing light on top of it. I would ask you to remember 5 things. out of today with me. They are gloriously simple. Firstly, ask questions of your audience, ask questions of your clients. An interesting thing is I do with professional companies, you know how you get lawyers and accountants and all that sort of thing. In the waiting room, they've got the glory book. Do you know the glory book that's got all the testimonials? All the testimonials that none of the ruddy partners have read. And I look through it, I pull out things that they're good at, and I then go and look at their website and try and find them. They're not there. They haven't looked at the testimonials and said, we're good at this, we're going to tell other people we're good at this. Find out about your audience, your customers. Get testimonials. Because testimonials are important. You can see I'm rather hooked on the testimonials. I've got them inside my little brochurette card. But they're important. They remind you of what you're good at, and you can always sharpen your communication based on your understanding of your testimonials. So, firstly, do your research. What does the audience think, know, and feel? Secondly, identify a starting position and a finishing position. Make it timely, realistic, and measurable. Hit me, baby, one more time. You need a micro-message to take your audience from one to the other. And that micro-message will quickly and concisely convey the essence of your brand, your service, or your product. Thirdly, edit. Edit, edit, edit. Nice to know, should know, must know. Reduce down the information that you're presenting to people so that you can be absolutely concise and you're not going to bore them to death. Fourthly, always leave your audience wanting more. My name's Dan Bond. Be good, be kind, be careful. Take care.